development. Being presented by our own Representative Brady. It's all yours.
Great. Let me first say that I have nothing against skiers, even though I have become a fair weather skier in my old age. I live with a household full of diehard skiers. I appreciate very much the ski culture and economy in Vermont. The intention here in this bill that was a collaborative effort with some other legislators is to decouple elite athletic development and perhaps economic development from the public education fund and our education system. Specifically, the bill would set up a Vermont Skier Development Fund to provide scholarships to 20 Vermont high school students from any community in the state, not just certain communities, as is the case today, with a $25,000 tuition scholarship for 4 years at one of the Vermont ski academies. This bill acknowledges that these schools play an important role in advancing Vermont's ski and boarding economy and brand, and invites promising athletes from across Vermont to be equally able to take advantage of that opportunity. And further, this certainly would need some work, but there's a proposal that there may be a couple seats reserved for adaptive skiers to underscore the growing inclusive brand of skiing in the Vermont ski and board economy. Given that this would be this is really more about sort of economic development, it would be run through ACCD, where they would evaluate the return on investment of the program and decide within 5 years whether or not it's meeting the benchmarks and whether or not to continue it. And by moving to a scholarship-based system for 20 students from anywhere in Vermont, it would actually reduce education spending from currently about 1.9 million out of the education fund that is going to ski academies to 500,000 for those scholarships, plus a small amount for ACCD to administer it. I will note that the bill also proposes some conforming changes to the rules for independent schools. And again, this was a collaborative effort among several legislators. And while I fully support those and think those are really important things, as all of education is sort of on the table here that we need to sort out, I think the more important part of this bill is about particularly ski academies and that funding, and that perhaps the discussion around some of the rules for independent schools beyond ski academies we can have related to other bills that are on the law or coming. I will note, a couple of things that have long drawn my concern about this, and then it came up again in the redistricting task force. One is that this bill increases the likelihood that this is a benefit for any Vermonter, not just people declaring residency, perhaps in a second home for the purpose of accessing the tuition subsidies, which is potentially happening in pockets of the state. It requires that students would have gone through 8th grade in a Vermont public school or approved independent school in order to be eligible. And it acknowledges that, under the current construct, ski academies are obviously an extremely expensive, elite institutions. And it requires quite a bit of additional funding from families for students to go, anywhere from $30,000 or more on top of the publicly available tuition. So they're not necessarily currently, truly available to, in addition, just geographically students, but to all Vermont families, given the extraordinary additional amount needed to pay for them. And it's really, a couple of things really drew my attention to it during listening to some of the public meetings of the redistricting task force. One, they identified at one point in lots of the data that I think they were really great at just bringing forward, that according to data from the AOE, it looks like as of 2024, none of the students enrolled in the ski academies were economically disadvantaged nor had an IEP, which is certainly not then an average cross-section of Vermont students. And then in particular, there was a meeting, this caught my attention, when they were in Rutland for a public meeting, and they were talking about Barstow School District. which is sends majority of its students to Rutland High School, but has been experiencing tuition hikes and tax spikes driven by an increase in tuition paid to private schools. And the chair of the board from Barstow actually testified before the task force, or shared before the task force, and noted that in the last 5 years, the district had paid 122 private school tuitions, only half for students who graduated from Barstow's 8th grade. And they were increasingly concerned that families were moving into the district in order to access school choice, including to ski academies that required a significant, like 20,000 or more topping off by families. And there was some, I think, really good discussion at the task force around, how can we put some pretty common sense guardrails around some of the programs and institutions that have some, real merit and long historical ties in Vermont, like the ski academies and the ski industry, but do it in a little bit more logical way so that we are not incentivizing people who might be moving out of state to essentially get, a $25,000 coupon to a ski academy. Certainly this in and of itself does not solve all of our ed fund problems and challenges, but I think the work of the task force to start to point to some of the strategic changes we need to make. This is one of a suite of them that I know we are discussing and considering. But one, I think that for economic reasons and for access reasons for students is probably long overdue. I think we can certainly discuss and debate the size of the scholarship, the number of students, the rules around it. These are just ideas created here, in the bill, but those would certainly require some further discussion and consideration.
Josh, go ahead.
I have a couple questions, but the first is probably a simple one.
Yeah.
Page 1, statement of purpose, line
Yeah.
13 says 21 students. Page 2, line 9 says 20 students. Chapter 1, sorry. So is it, that's my bad. I got it wrong as we were talking. My apologies. Start off strong here. So a question I was given that it's going to sunset in 5 years from when it starts, right? You'll have freshmen, sophomores, juniors. What happens to them if they're in they start in year 3 and now in 2 years their scholarship is going to go away? What are they supposed to do without they no longer have that funding?
Well, I think the sunset, as it's stated in the bill, the sunset would be, is only there sort of a check back or review for ACCD and as this program shifts and has more, guardrails around it and a more careful scholarship program for it to see if this is, viable, if the return on the investment is there, if it is truly encouraging the most promising athletes in Vermont and making this accessible to a range of Vermont students that we would get information back from ACCD in terms of whether or not to continue the program. So,
But in the event it wasn't
Yeah.
continued, they just dropped it. What do we do with those kids? Do they get to have a scholarship for their last couple of years, or are they just left out in the lurch?
I will defer any particular legal questions to Ledge Counsel, but I know that we have also a pretty long history of, as we've made changes throughout the system for lack of a better phrase, so the grandfathering, for students that as currently exists in the changes under independent schools and Act 73, students whose schools might have changed eligibility remain eligible through their high school career. So it's something we have quite a bit of precedent in doing here.
I do have a couple more, but I think.
Yeah.
Well, let me just add to that comment. I think that we have been encouraged to use the tool of sunsets a little more frequently in legislation as a real reminder. You should evaluate this program, see if it should continue.
And it's two actually really quick questions.
Yeah.
Do you have any numbers on how many ski schools are we talking about and what's the enrollment?
There are, I believe, four ski schools in, or at least 4, there may be 5, but 4 that are still eligible under Act 73. And as of 2024, like 102, 103 students in the state that were students at those schools.
Vermont students. I think you just answered my other question.
Yeah,
Because
so-
Act 73 wouldn't take care of this whole problem. There would still be those 4 schools that would still fall.
Well, I guess That's sort of my question too. Do we actually have a definition of what counts as a ski academy in Vermont to know what we're talking about? So you said how many? So that was one of my questions. And how many students are currently receiving public tuition? Because I am of course familiar with the one in my backyard
Mhm.
that has 69 students attending it, but I don't know how many of those 69 are receiving public tuition. I could do my own research, but.
I would, Representative Brady, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of language in this bill about how we define what an independent school approved for public dollars is, which would limit that further so that
Right.
ski schools would no longer be part of it, hence the need for a scholarship program.
Right, so there's really two parts, there's the ski schools get no public tuition under this. And then there's other rules about all independent schools and what would happen with it, but specific to ski schools,
Yes.
I was wondering how many students we have in Vermont receiving public tuition for ski schools. I think it's about 100,
As
Two or
of
three.
2020, I think the numbers I have are 2020.
about 4 or 5.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, I guess, I see what you're doing with the ski school, but, when we get on page 9 and 10 and we start going down that, we're, straight strike through with supervisory unions. I think this is gonna hurt a lot of the schools that service a lot of kids, right? So I guess that would be a huge concern.
Yeah, so I'm gonna pause that discussion because we have a whole other bill that speaks directly to that, and maybe we'll take that deep dive. If either that bill comes up or this.
and I think there's interest in the committee to move forward on it, that one, will require some collaboration with the economic development, with the Commerce Committee, but also maybe, we take just certain sections of it in order to keep our work on it incredibly narrow. We can decide on other bills on their merits on those, yeah.
Yes, we do everything. I'll get back to you. So Emily, and then Jana, and then Josh.
So quickly, I'm trying to pick, I don't know whether you have the answer or not, but do we, when I think about this, I going back in my head to when my kids were in school and there was a child who was a really good snowboarder and
Mhm.
couldn't get in.
Mhm.
Does this seem like it's opening up an opportunity for our Vermont students who don't have the financial resources to attend outside this? That's what it feels like to me.
Right.
Really, because my head is in this one place with this one student, this is a real boost, it seems to me, than what we have currently in place today.
Yes, this would, obviously, these are, really unique institutions and an important part of the Vermont economy and our tourism and our ski economy. But again, they're expensive endeavors. And so for a student to attend any of the ski academies, on the top of the public tuition money that's following them, parents are paying somewhere between $20,000 and I believe about $37,000 additional per year, or families are, for students to attend. So this would take that piece away and say for these 20 students, they are, they're attending on this $25,000 scholarship by the state of Vermont, being seen clearly as some of our most promising young, snow sport athletes in Vermont. And regardless of that additional ability to pay, it certainly doesn't preclude, families and kids who have a ton of promise and families have means to apply to and go to and pay, to go to the ski academy. This is, that certainly exists. And I think, there's just, to me, this one is I know a lot of challenging things around the independent school, history in Vermont, but in particular, these are ski academies. They are not your average academic, sitting down for English for 84 minutes and then math for 84 minutes. They obviously would provide diplomas and have educational programs, but these are very niche elite athletic programs. And I think we'd be better served to acknowledge that, treat them as such, keep them as part of our economy and culture, but not try to lump it with your general K-12 education. Most kids are never going to, this is a very, very different type of education for a very different purpose, for extremely elite athletic competition, not just to get a high school diploma.
Representative Brown?
Oh, thanks. I would say even as we sort of seek to drill into the most current data, I mean, I think the fact that we're talking about 100 and change students and $1.9 million out of the ed fund tells like a pretty compelling first glance story. So I appreciate that we're having the conversation.
Representative Dobrovich.
Two questions, more so about the scholarship piece. So Vermont Ski Academies, as far as my understanding, generally offer need-based financial aid, not athletic scholarships currently. Wouldn't the institution of the scholarship plan, which doesn't make any consideration for an athlete's financial needs and the exclusion of ski academies from town tuitioning eligibility, result in less equitable access for Vermont students? I mean, you're taking away something that's available to Vermont students currently, especially in their
So
area.
very small amount of Vermont students currently. You have to live in a tuition town, you know.
But still, right, you got Stratton Mountain, right? Stratton Mountain School. So if you don't tuition those kids, they're going to go to Burnberg, right? So you're keeping, that's going to be their next closest school. Why not give them that opportunity to go to that school in their area? And one of our most elite snowboarders came from the means of nothing and went to Stratton Academy. And it was because they prioritized need-based. And this scholarship seems to just be based on your athletic prowess. And we're going to, limit the access to kids going there, not expand it. I thought, I think if we should expand options to everybody, not take away.
I think the program limits options, tremendously, and that if an incredibly promising skier lives in Richmond, need-based or not, there's not going to be $20,000 of Vermont public education dollars following that skier there. So we already have, I would say, a very imperfect way. It's very geography based. And this came to my attention again in listening to the task force testimony and hearing superintendents and districts saying, we are seeing families move in from out of state or establish a second home in order to avail themselves of Vermont's public education tax dollars, $20,000 coupon to a ski academy when they can purchase a second home. That to me says, there was a good conversation at the task force about, wow, there has to be a better, more precise way to do this so that we aren't, taking a few communities and sort of hyper incentivizing potentially, families with a lot of means, again, fully able to avail themselves of it so that should they choose, but not to use, the Vermont Public Education Fund towards those schools. So.
How did you arrive at the number of 20 scholarships? Is there a specific reason it's 20 up to 20?
Yeah, I think it's that's somewhat arbitrary.
Okay.
I think it to Representative Brown's point, it's how much do we want to invest of what in education? So how much do we want to spend on early college, on pre-K, on universal meals, on kids going to ski academies? So here's a starting volley. $500,000, $500,000. That's a pretty substantial amount in economic development terms. Maybe that's not the right number, the right amount. There are other states, I believe Montana, that do some similar things in terms of this as economic development tools, that the sort of, elite training and kind of niche things that a state might have and supports young people, but it doesn't happen through the education fund. It happens through an economic development means. And that was some of the kind of early impetus of this as well. But, I think certainly that is something worth, discussing, investigating. I don't know much about how many applicants there are in a given year or what the sort of pool of who's even, qualified to attend on the athletic merits, these schools. So, yeah, fair.
Thank you.
Yep.
Just to be clear, this would be the way it's written, 20 students total, basically 5 per year, as opposed to 20 per year.
No, it's 20.
20 per year.
Up to 20 per year.
Right, but everybody gets a 4-year, gets an award for 4 years. So therefore, you would never have more than 20 receiving the scholarship per year.
So if 20 got it, you're saying if 20 got it in the first year, nobody's getting one the next year.
Right.
Well, stay.
It's 20 total, not 20 per year. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess that's a nuance I didn't notice.
Otherwise, you're talking 8,
Interesting.
25 apiece.
I think better way to, come at this, if we're talking about the dollars, is to think about how much do we want to invest in a state and ski academies, and where do we want to invest money from in ski academies? Is that education fund dollars? Are those general fund dollars? What purpose are they serving?
Okay, thanks. We'll do the walkthrough now.
James, Office of Legislative Counsel.
So as you proceed through this, we'll stick to the sort of narrow areas that Representative Brady stuck to without going into the longer definitions.
Got it. So we're going to walk through H777 of as introduced, which is entitled An Act Relating to the Vermont Skier Development Scholarship Fund and Scholarship Program. So this bill proposes, I'm on page 2, to add brand new subchapter to your scholarships chapter. Again, I think this language could live in a couple different places, but if I try and think about I'm trying to find language, where am I going to look? And if there's a scholarship chapter and I'm looking for scholarship language, I'm probably going to start there first. So but we can put this, if you choose to take this bill up, the language can pretty much live wherever you'd like it to live. So Vermont Skier Development Fund is the name of the subchapter, and the first section in that subchapter would be 2871, Vermont Skier Development Scholarship Fund and Scholarship Program. So the way this is drafted as introduced is the scholarship fund and the scholarship program itself are all in one statute. And it begins in subsection A by creating a special fund to establish, to be known as the Vermont Skier Development Scholarship Fund, which shall be used for the purpose of funding scholarships for up to 20 sponsored Vermont skiers and snowboarders to attend eligible Vermont ski academies. And then some of this is standard language that we see in all of our special funds. For example, the fund shall be established and held separate and apart from any other funds or monies of the state, and shall be used and administered exclusively for the purposes of this section. And then the monies are invested as permitted for the investment of funds belonging to the state or held in the treasury. And then the fund consists of sales and use tax in the amount specified in 32 VSA 9714, and we'll get there. Such sums as may be appropriated or transferred thereto from the General Assembly, the State Emergency Board, or the Joint Fiscal Committee during such times as the General Assembly is not in session. All interest earned from the investment of fund balances and any other money from any other source. The fund would be administered by Agency of Commerce and Community Development, ACCD. And the Agency of Commerce and Community Development it has to administer the awards to comply with tax provisions. And that's the special fund. So the special fund is created. And then subsection B is the scholarship program itself. So ACCD shall establish a scholarship program to facilitate the payment of scholarships from the special fund to Vermont ski academies on behalf of 20 sponsored Vermont skiers and snowboarders accepted for enrollment in the eligible ski academy of their choice. Eligibility requirements for scholarship recipients. They have to have completed 8th grade in either a Vermont public school or an approved independent school to which the student's district of residence paid tuition on the student's behalf. So basically they have to be a publicly funded student. They have to be enrolled in grades 9, 10, 11, or 12. So the scholarship is only for high schoolers. And then we're going to get into a bunch of language regarding retaining the scholarship that is, in my opinion, as your education policy attorney, way outside of my wheelhouse. I am not a skier. So if I have gotten things wrong or I've phrased things oddly, please forgive me. If you choose to take up this bill, this would be a great area to spend some time honing it.
Was the language that you're about to go through based on examples elsewhere?
Nope. Gee, that would have been a good place to start. So in order to retain a scholarship in subsequent years, you have to meet certain criteria. There has to be evidence of athletic, and so for the sake of time, I'm just going to go high level here. So there has to be evidence of athletic progress. Then there's criteria to demonstrate athletic progress. Satisfactory academic progress, attendance compliance, and code of conduct adherence. Compliance with injury reporting and return to sport protocols. And Vermont engagement, and then criteria for what Vermont engagement can be demonstrated through. So that's to maintain the scholarship. The ski academies, there's no definition necessarily of ski academy, but these are in order to use your scholarship somewhere, the school has to meet the following criteria. They have to provide student support and equity, and then there are descriptions of what that specifically needs to be. I'm on page 5 now. There has to be transparency and financial accountability, including audited tuition and fee schedules. There needs to be academic integrity, and again, that is spelled out with some concepts that are included in academic integrity. There needs to be athletic program quality, and then again, criteria for what that means. Data sharing and evaluation, and again, criteria for what that means. So you've got eligibility for the scholarship in general, eligibility to maintain the scholarship, and then ski academy school eligibility. ACCD, so I'm at the very bottom of page 5. ACCD shall adopt rules to define selection, prioritization criteria, and requirements in accordance with the subdivision. And the rules shall use the following criteria to evaluate selection prioritization. This is giving very specific guidance on what these rules need to include, which is always a good idea when you are delegating your authority through rulemaking. Just wanted to highlight that. So athletic performance and trajectory, again, criteria under that on how to evaluate athletic performance and trajectory. Vermont connection and public return, which shall include demonstrated commitment to compete under Vermont affiliation or contribute to Vermont Ski Academy. Commitment, coachability, and durability, which shall include an analysis of a potential recipient's attendance and training consistency. Coach evaluation, standardized rubrics, and injury resilience plan. And academic readiness, which shall be demonstrated by evidence that a potential recipient can meet academic requirements with support and a clear plan to address learning differences. I'm on page 7 now. The agency, again, we're talking about ACCD here, not AOE, shall administer the scholarship program as follows. Program funds up to 20 scholarships to Vermont ski academies for sponsored Vermont skiers and snowboarders accepted for enrollment in the eligible ski academy of their choice. The agency can use up to $25,000 for administrative costs and marketing. And to ensure support for competitive adaptive skiers, they must prioritize the award of up to 3 scholarships to Vermont adaptive skiers. May. Sorry, thank you, May. And what page am I on? 7, sorry. I think I said I was on 7 before, I clearly was 6. Page 7, line 10, subsection C requires an annual report back to you all, and then I'll let the criteria for the report back speak for itself in the interest of time, which brings us to section 2. So section 2 is an amendment to section 2 and for the statute that requires school districts to maintain a high school or pay tuition. You can see basically the entire statute remains current law. That's what those asterisks represent. And you're just adding on the very top of page 9, a new subsection D to say that a school board is prohibited from paying tuition under the town tuition program to a Vermont Ski Academy. Secondary students interested in attending a Vermont Ski Academy can apply for a scholarship through the Skier Development Scholarship Program that we just walked through. Section 3 is amending the statute that governs the amount of high school tuition that is paid. And again, this is just language to kind of keep everything, one-stop shopping. If you were just looking up how much high school tuition is, you would see that a school board is prohibited from paying tuition under this section to a Vermont Ski Academy, you wouldn't have to go to section 822 to see that. And then section 4 makes a similar amendment to section 828, that under the town tuition program, an approved independent school is one that is other than a Vermont Ski Academy. And then do you want me to go on to section 5?
Yes.
Okay.
Curious about section 5.
Section 5 is where we're getting the money. So notwithstanding 16 VSA 4025 is your ed fund statute. And if you take money out of the ed fund for something other than one of the enumerated uses, you repeal the property tax. We're going to notwithstand that. We don't want to repeal the property tax. 525,000 in revenue from the sales and use tax imposed by chapter 233 of title 32, which is the tax title, will be deposited annually into the Skier Development Scholarship Fund established pursuant to 16 VSA 2871, which is what we began walking through. So this is saying the sales and use tax that goes to the ed fund, out of that, $525,000 will be taken annually and go into the Skier Development Scholarship Fund. $525,000 is 20 scholarships at $25,000 a pop, plus 25,000 for administrative costs. That's how you get to 525,000. And then there's some information about inflation. Section 6 is the prospective repeal of everything basically related to the Skier Development Scholarship Fund and Program. And it is exactly as your chair, I believe it was your chair suggested, in order to force you all to look back on whether or not you want to keep this program going, we're going to repeal it. So you have to take action if you want to keep it going. This is a pretty standard process. Sometimes we call them pilot programs. Sometimes we do it like the School Construction Advisory Board. We sunset that in 10 years so that it's a kind of forcing you all to look at it and make sure it's still working. But that's all this is. It's totally a policy choice. And then section 7 is that initial transfer. So once this act takes effect, section 5 will be an automatic transfer of money from sales and use tax to the Skier Development Fund every year. And we're going to start, we're going to trigger that, transfer on July 15th, 2026 for the first time. And then the effective date would be July 1, 2026.
I have a question for the sponsor of the bill, if you wouldn't mind. The funding for this coming out of the ed fund as opposed to an appropriation out of the general fund or whatever, we should talk a little bit about that.
Out of sales and use.
Yes, well, which is the equivalent of it coming out of the ed fund.
Well, we don't know all. 100% of sales and use is now in the ed fund.
Yes.
No,
So
No, not sales and use.
person use.
churches and uses, yeah. Not sure I understand.
So my question is basically, so you bring up this is sales tax. Is that correct?
That is how it is drafted, yes.
Yeah. So therefore, if you take $500,000 sales tax, that's $500,000 out of the ed fund that would normally be going into the ed fund. And I guess that's what I was curious about, whether it was your intention to fund this scholarship program out of the ed fund, period.
No, but again, I'm not sure.
If I'm understanding
Oh,
right,
yeah.
it's diverting it before it gets to the ed fund because of the property tax repeal, but it is money that would otherwise have ended up there.
Correct.
Yeah.
So
But
6 of one, half dozen of another, or
maybe.
not?
Well, like the legal mechanics are important, but yeah, probably.
20 that wouldn't or otherwise be available to the ed fund.
General fund.
I just really, I was,
No, I,
because I was in my mind refer to it as there's purchase and use and then sales tax. And purchase and use is in fact those rooms and meals that is actually a quarter of it.
Not all purchase
So
is either.
Shall we?
Yes.
Yes,
like,
like.
I have to
You
go
just
back.
had
to
a
my- I
presentation
shared
on
it
it.
my-
I did.
All of sales.
Never remember.
Thank you, thank you.
This is section
Okay.
4025. Ignore, there's contingencies everywhere thanks to Act 73. I would point out if something we are discussing is not actually law. But for the purposes of this discussion, Act 73 has not amended anything. So 25% of meals and rooms tax goes to the ed fund, 1/3 of purchase and use tax, and all of sales and use tax.
Thank you.
Great, Josh.
I do have a few questions. We didn't go over section 4, but it's in there, so I have some questions.
That's fine. I actually thought section 4 was a little longer than this.
So in H77, would this bill make all independent schools that don't follow educational quality standards under the public school rules ineligible for tuition? Does that mean that this bill would make schools like Burton, St. J Academy, and Linden Institute, which follow the independent rules series 2200, ineligible for public tuition as of July 1st, 2026?
I have no idea which schools meet these criteria, so I can't speak to what schools would be eligible.
Those three don't. I'm asking for those in specific. So given that, should they not, and they don't have any interest in following EQS, they would be ineligible under this bill. How would the students served by these schools who have no public options available to them receive an education the next school year?
This bill does not address that.
It's unfortunate.
That was a nice way of saying that's for you all to figure out.
So my question it would be for the presenter. Did you guys contemplate that when you had that section written?
Again, this was a collaboration across several legislators, and I think that, we should just focus on the ski piece as us in terms of talking about ski schools. And I also do believe that this committee needs to have a broader discussion around, where we send our dollars and what the rules are. And so I think as part of our work going forward and figuring out if how we're going to implement Act 73, the question about, same dollars, same rules, still remains.
So my only concern is that this is in here, and based on the name and the statement of purpose, it doesn't feel like that's transparent. Because but based on the name and the statement of purpose, I would assume that wouldn't be in there. So I feel like that, it wasn't as transparent. Those pieces weren't as transparent about what the bill really has in it as it could be.
And these are all, points that should be taken about further. Representative Quimby.
So mine is specific to the eligible ski academies, which is on page 4, line 17. The eligible ski academies to receive these scholarship dollars must meet a certain set of criteria. And again, we could do my own research, but I didn't know if you knew. And so if we have about 4 or 5 ski academies currently, do any of those 4 or 5 currently meet these requirements of having special license, do we know, or do we need to research that?
The criteria would need fleshing out through rulemaking. So it's not that these automatically become the criteria. Exactly, the sort of alignment between what things they would meet or whether these are even the right criteria, I think would be up to us to decide and drill down further.
We take the bill.
This is certainly not, in working with Beth on this, and there are literally hundreds of requests in December, one of my directions was, let's get the sort of concept and the skeleton here of the intention is to move to all Vermont students being eligible, to it being truly Vermont students and not families moving in, and to trying to avoid, for at least the Vermont funded students, the need to top off $20,000 or $30,000. There's a lot of detail in this that, we could have asked far more hours of her time but really wanted to get the concept in front of the committee to consider whether we flesh out all of those details, but before asking Beth to do like 30 hours of work on the concept. Yeah, so completely fair questions, and yes, I understand that.
We'll have to figure out.
This is not a fully baked, ready to go product, but I think it's an important concept in conversation in the basket of education transformation. And so it gives us at least a vague starting.
Thank you.
And I sort of look at the section that you brought up, Representative Quimby, as more of a checklist of things that we should consider. All right, we are going to pause. We're going to take 7 minutes. So let's get back at 2:35 and we're going to get a refresher and kind of walk through what we have for in the miscellaneous ed bill. And is your timing okay?